Welcome to the Freight Project podcast, brought to you by Ceresys, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management technology and solutions.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Freight Project podcast. On today's podcast episode, Ceresys welcomes Kevin Hill, CEO and founder of Carrier Lists, a company specifically designed to make it easy for shippers to find the carriers they need by cutting carrier search time in half, simply by calling recently vetted carriers based on the shipper's needs. Kevin is a logistics and transportation professional who started off as a freight broker and saw a huge need to provide shippers better data and search access to the vast number of carriers that exist in the marketplace today. On this episode, Kevin and I will discuss how that access to more data in transportation management is allowing carriers and shippers to have fact-based conversations that are resulting in improved relationships and thusly more efficient shipping, profitability, and access to available capacity. Kevin and I will also discuss the importance for shippers to have a targeted, vetted carrier database so that shippers are not relying on a single carrier or just a few carriers, which can lead to costs increasing and capacity problems. We'll conclude our conversation by addressing what data has meant for the transportation management sector and how data can improve outcomes if you choose to analyze the data you extract from your shipping processes. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project podcast. And thanks for being here today, Kevin. We're excited to hear your unique insights as the co-founder and owner of Carrier Lists and just some unique perspectives and best practices and tips that you might be able to help out our audience with because of your experience in dealing with both shippers and carriers. But with that said, you're really the best advocate for who you are and what is Carrier Lists. So tell the audience a little bit about who you are, why you started Carrier Lists, and why you think it's important for the marketplace.
Thanks again, Adam, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and discuss what we've learned by calling and basically developing Carrier Lists. Once again, my name's Kevin Hill. I'm the founder and president of Carrier Lists. We're based here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we started about 2 years ago. Before that, I was in a 3PL freight brokerage situation for about 4 or 5 years here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And before that, I did financial information and market research sales out on the East Coast. One of the problems with freight brokerage and really sourcing capacity in general is how to source trucks. The market is so fragmented that oftentimes it's hard to reach out and really sort very well. There's your tools, load boards, your internal network of carriers that you used before, but how do you really build relationships and go out and find carriers that are often very hard to find, who don't have sales departments and who aren't reaching out to you? So I had an idea of developing a database. So there's about 300,000 MC numbers out there for hire carriers, and I try to segment that out into a bucket that was manageable to start calling and gathering information on that. So our goal is to create the biggest and baddest sourcing tool out there for both shippers and 3PLs.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's needed today, right? Obviously, and having come from a 3PL, having worked with carriers, having worked with drivers, owner operators, the big carriers, you obviously see that is clearly a difficult spot for many shippers to be in when they're trying to source carriers or vice versa, carriers getting matched better to shippers. Now, technology's helped a little bit with that over the years, but is still, as you noted, one of the more fragmented industries compared to some other industries when it comes to data and technology. So as a carrier database company at Carrier Lists, you do, have the pleasure and that insight in working with so many of the players, the drivers, those carriers, the shippers, who are all, wanting to get access to that great information, that stronger contact information that you offer that can allow you to not only, get those first initial contact points, but start developing and going deeper with relationships. So with these unique perspectives in dealing with these folks and seeing how important it is to develop relationships once you have the right contact information, what are the key factors for shippers to have a very collaborative and ultimately effective relationship with carriers?
I think you're exactly right, Adam. It's a very fragmented market, and technology and information's a few years behind other industries, especially like the financial markets. It's quite a few years behind. But with the new data coming in from ELDs, from all different sources, I think it's really key going forward for shippers and carriers both to have a very transparent and collaborative or partnership type of programs. In the past, it seems like when there's any swings in the pendulum on capacity, one party or the other was always trying to gouge the other, right? To get the maximum number of concessions and a very win-lose type of relationship. But I think with the new data that's coming in and certainly the driver shortage and restrictions in capacity, I think it's really really important for both sides, both the carrier side and the shipper side, to have to be more transparent and really develop stronger relationships, because you're going to be on the short end of the stick sooner rather than later. And then and that's really kind of the immediate right now. There's a tsunami of data coming to the marketplace over the next 5 years. There's going to be so much data that you have to be transparent, that the opacity of the market is going to fade away quite a bit. And we're seeing some of that with the ELDs, right, where you can use that data, or carriers can use that data to go into shippers and strengthen an argument of rate increases based on loading and unloading times, right? So whereas that was kind of subsidized by all shippers in the market, that it kind of subsidized the bad actors or the shippers that are very inefficient, you can now pinpoint those shippers. So they're going to have to work with carriers on getting drivers in and out, and that's kind of the most immediate transparency that's coming into the market right now.
Yeah, so data everywhere, and only more data to come, a data flood, a data tsunami, as you said. And I think those folks who understand that data is the first part of being able to increase visibility, to get a shared version of the truth, so you can have collaborative partnerships with carriers. And that's so key. But after data, it then goes in and kind of switches into, what do I do with that data, right? And how do I use it? And so at Ceresys, we know when we engage with a shipper providing more information or technology, such as through our transportation management system as a platform to better match to a broader base of parcel, LTL, or full truckload carriers, we typically see that shippers, when we engage with them, they don't really have a lot. They may have a cobbled together Excel typed data spreadsheet of carriers, and you hope that it gets tribally passed down from maybe the person who was there for 20 years to the next 4 people who rotate in and out, and then you finally get the right person in. But why is, having a consistent, broad carrier database important for a shipper? And maybe you can answer on the carrier side, and you talked a little bit about that and understanding their profitability. But why is it important for a shipper, especially in these times of tight capacity, to have an accurate carrier database or carrier information?
Information is king, right? Information is power. And just like in the sales, the sales avenue, right? We all know from sales, you have to have a full pipeline, right? You have to. It's a numbers game, right?
It's a numbers game. Yep.
You have to have a full pipeline, and that's the key. It gives you the flexibility and speed. And the shippers that have the full pipelines, who are actively going out and searching for carriers that match their need, are going to be at a competitive advantage, right? With the shippers that have it cobbled together and they rely on carriers calling them and soliciting them, their salespeople. Not all carriers have sales teams. The vast majority of carriers operating under 100 trucks don't really have much of a sales team. And if they do, it might be 1 or 2 people or 3, but they might not be out. You might not be on their radar as a shipper, right? So you have to get on their they're regular. There's some challenges to that, right? So depending on your size as a shipper, it's hard to achieve scale. It's hard to get an ROI. Even with a small team of interns or people calling the phone looking for shippers, trying to find lanes that match up with what you're shipping, right? Natural backhaul, natural head haul, people like that. So it's hard to, so it's a struggle, and you have to be very committed as a shipper. But if you do that, you can lock in really great relationships that will protect you on when capacity gets really tight like this, or even really loose, and there's volatility in getting trucks to your door at any price. So there's clear advantages to having that full pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've really talked a lot about, data and information. You've said it, information is power, but, carrier lists and having a simple spreadsheet or a database of carriers is not just having contact information, right? It really is a treasure trove of data. Can you give us a bit more detail on what kind of data Carrier List collects, why that's important, and why data is important in the world of more efficient transportation management in general?
Sure. Yeah. So basically at Carrier List, as a broker, if I couldn't find loads, or if I couldn't find capacity on load boards or in our own internal system of carriers our own internal carrier lists, right, or network, then options C, D, E, and F were horrible options, right? So, there wasn't a database that I could go in and quickly search by what I needed, by trailer type, by preferred lanes that carriers like to run, and any kind of specializations, and kind of updated dispatch emails, the decision makers that I could call up and book loads with, right? So there wasn't any kind of central database of that. It's all personal carrier lists, right? That were cobbled together, right? Whether you're a shipper or a broker, you're cobbling that together, or the person who's been there 25 years and talked to these 26 carriers, right? But there wasn't really an industrial one with 20, 30, 40, 50,000 carriers listed, where you could easily go in and say, we're running vans from Dallas, Texas to Atlanta, and we need to find carriers that match that. And within 3 or 4 clicks of a button now, you can find a whole list of carriers that match that description. So when we're talking about prospecting and keeping pipelines full, Carrier List is a prospecting tool for carriers. It cuts immense amount of time and effort and work down into basically search and call, or search and email. So in that way, data is very important for creating those competitive advantages of flexibility and speed. So that's really how data should be used, right? Should be used to get you
Absolutely.
to who you need to contact, who you need to talk to, and figuring out how to create a relationship and a partnership as quickly as possible.
Yeah, where the energy, we only have a finite amount of energy, right? We have 9 to 5, or the crazy people out there who work 100 hours a week, and,
Yes.
and God bless them. But, we shouldn't spend that finite energy on just trying to get started with what our task is. I know for me, when it comes to, if I look at it from a marketing perspective, maybe a public relations standpoint, if I have a list or a database of media partners that I've built over the years, in year 6, it's immensely more valuable, because it's not me finding their contact information. It's tapping into the 17 interactions we've had. And when maybe there's a more substantive interaction, or it's time to go deeper, it's not hard for me to extend that into a deeper relationship immediately. And so if my task is to get more coverage for Ceresys and media publications, and I'm not doing what others are doing, simply just trying to find the right person and establish that relationship, but I'm in year 6 of 17 interactions, I have much more confidence as a marketing manager that I can have a reliable amount of coverage in that publication than I was if I hadn't already had that information available to me previously in some sort of way. And if that 6 years ago, if I had platform that immediately connected me to these media publication and the right people at that media publication, I'd be so much further down the road than my peers. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about, right? Competitive advantage. So if you can turn data and information into that, that's how you get ahead. And in 2018, man, I've been covering this industry in 6 years and really in it day in and day out from kind of a journalistic standpoint, really looking into the market. And we're seeing articles in the Wall Street Journal about the truck driver shortage and capacity crunch. That's new. We used to see it in our industry publications, but to me, that's an indication that it's real this time and that it's really hurting shippers and making things difficult for carriers. So with all of this data and all of this information, it gets you going, and it gets you started building those relationships with carriers that are the capacity holders. But what are the not so commonly known tips as it relates to being more carrier friendly that shippers should focus on to find capacity this year?
You're exactly right about the capacity crunch too, because it's lasted longer than any other capacity crunch that I can remember, and it's really showing up on Wall Street, right? All the quarterly earnings reports this year. That's been one of their main keys, right? The transportation costs are going up because of the capacity crunch, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. With that said, there's a couple main tips that will help shippers build a better relationship with carriers, and a lot of that has to do with the ELD data that's coming in, right? And basically the restrictions on what drivers can put down in their logs, right? So historically, shippers have relied on drivers to kind of make the books work to get on-time deliveries, right? Well, that's kind of out the window now. Now it's all about driver time, and there's a premium that is being placed on driver's times now, because basically you get in there, the ELD is going to track everything, and there's very little room for maneuvering your time around, right? So that's going to be a big thing. So the premium on that 2 hours, your traditional 2 hours of load and unload time, is to become more efficient in that. If you're not very good at it, become really good at it. Because if you're not, it's going to be hard for you to attract carriers into your facility. And if you do, they're going to require a higher rate, right, to pay for that time. What else is going to happen is that your on-time deliveries to your own customers are going to take a hit as well, right? Because if you know that 2 or 3 hours that a driver has to wait on your dock to get loaded, that can't be made up for anymore, right? So that 2 or 3 hours might turn into 6 or 7 hours with traffic or anything else on the road, and your on-time delivery to your customers, you might start facing some fines and penalties on that. And I think I mentioned this earlier. The second tip is don't rely on carriers calling you to build your carrier base, right? When capacity is tight, you need to go out there and be actively looking for new carriers, right? We talk to carriers all day long. We probably talked to about 35,000 carriers over the last 2 years. And very few of those running under 100 trucks have complete sales teams, right? They might have one person, or it's a family business. So they might not be reaching out to you, but you really need to, I can't emphasize it enough, really. You need to be reaching out to them. You need to be looking for carriers that might be a good complement to you and building up that pipeline. So going back, loading, unloading times, make sure you have a sterling reputation for that. And on the other side, always be prospecting. Just like your sales guys have to always be prospecting, your transportation managers need to be always prospecting for new carriers that can complete your capacity.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing when it comes to the example of public relationships. Public relations for myself.
Yeah.
I kind of look at it as a sales activity.
It is.
And a lot of us in our jobs don't want to think we're salespeople and that we have to source. But if you can get into that mindset a little bit, and I dedicate even just 2 times per week, 30 minutes to keep developing relationships. I make it a point to can I find contact information with media folks?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, how can I build a relationship based on their criteria and their makeup and makes a relationship of relevance? So absolutely.
Yeah,
All right. So now that we got you here, when it comes to, all of this stuff, really focused on good carrier relations and building up your database built on good information. You obviously have a great insight into how technology and data can aid the marketplace in becoming more effective. What do you think the next 12 months will bring in the way of what people will focus on that will make a difference from a technology standpoint?
I think the tsunami of data is starting right now. It's going to build up over time, but over the next 12 months, we're going to see a lot of data come in, a lot of data-driven decision-making that hadn't been there before because trucking and logistics really didn't have the data, and certainly it wasn't a collaborative type of data setting. But right now, you have the ELD data, right? So everyone's trying to get their hands on this ELD data to make decisions, right? And whether that's from carriers using that as just justifications for rate increases or shippers using it for rate decreases. You have just the whole telematics, you have tracking, you have guys like us who are doing it old school and picking up the phone and just calling carriers and generating new information that hasn't been on the marketplace. And then you have blockchain, right? You have smart contracts, you have payment systems. I think there's going to be more of a standardization and collaborative data sharing going forward. So you can use it to, as you said before, to use it to create a competitive advantage, to make quicker decisions, more, make quicker and more flexible decisions. And the people who do that, who really embrace technology, embrace the data that's coming in, will be able to grow their businesses. Those that don't are going to get left behind. And I think they're going to be left behind pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It still shocks me to this day that, the TMS penetration is still not over 50%. Blows my mind. But I think it's an indication of the freight world in general. It takes long to disrupt. I was a marketing guy and thought everything can be disrupted. Look at the taxi business. Mm-hmm. Uber upended it. Mm-hmm. Totally, the freight market can do that. And I've been proven wrong time and time again. I think the age of the worker is an interesting aspect. But even that still, 15 years ago, the freight market was super fragmented and there wasn't a lot of technology. Our web-based TMS was game-changing technology, even still 10, 15 years ago in this space. When web-based technology has been used for over 20 years. So it's just great to see companies like yourself, Kevin, kind of increase the awareness and the importance of data and the integrity of data and how you go about collecting it and then going about and how you use it and turn it into a real business value. And so thank you for, leading that charge, and all rising tides in this industry are going to lift all boats, or in our case, trucks, maybe. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not a good thing. That's a flood. But we want to avoid those like we did last year in hurricane, because that only add to capacity. But just want to thank you for being a guest here and offering your unique insights. We hope to have you again in the near future. And if you're on the Ceresys blog, look out in the future from some articles from Kevin. And check out carrier lists. Good option if you're needing to just start out your carrier database, or you've had one for years and you want to check against your own data. And if you're a carrier, Kevin and his team will help make sure that you understand how that process works. So thanks a lot, Kevin, for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure.